Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So today we're going over this week's new card, Corvus Glaive. Corvus is a 3/5 that reads, on reveal, discard 2 cards from your hand to get +1 max energy. So this is a pretty big piece of discard support, and he's also going to be joined next week by his better half, Proxima Midnight, which has some really good synergy with this card. So I think it's a little bit important to talk about her as well. Proxima is a 4/7 that reads, when this card is discarded, it ends up jumping into your location with the lowest power. This is the first time in a while we're getting 2 cards back to back that are kind of very reliant on one another. I do think Corvus can work without Proxima, but I do think the power of both these cards is going to be greatly amplified by playing them together. So I do want to mention that because this is something where if you want to pick up Corvus, you might also want to be planning or making that decision based around on if you also want to end up picking up Proxima. That said, I think the card can work on its own. I do think it's a little bit up in the air how good this card is going to be. It's been a while since we've gotten any dedicated discard support, and discard as an archetype has had kind of a hard time. Hela discard is having a lot of success, but normal traditional discard hasn't been doing that great. And I'm not sure if Corvus on his own is going to be enough to revive that archetype. However, maybe when Proxima releases next week, the 2 of them together can give it a bit of a boost that's been needing ever since we had the Chavez nerf a while back. In terms of these spotlight caches this week, I think this is a week a lot of people are going to be going for. The cards joining Corvus this week are going to be X-23 and Gladiator. Gladiator's the big one. It's seen play in a ton of different decks. It's one of the best, if not the best, 3-drop in the game right now. And it's a card a lot of people skipped on because when it came out, it was a 3/7. The meta was kind of hostile towards it at the time. A lot of people skipped on the card. Then it got buffed, the meta changed a bit, and now it's a very heavily played and sought after card that a lot of people just haven't had a chance to pick up yet. So in terms of, is this week a good spotlight week to go for? I think generally yes, if you want to get your hands on Gladiator, especially so if you also want to get your hands on Corvus, and if for some reason you haven't been able to pick up X-23, she's a pretty great one to pick up as well, mainly seeing play in the Destroy decks, absolutely vital piece to what makes them so strong. But maybe alongside Corvus, we can see her get a little bit more play in discard decks, because now we have more reason to want another card in our hand that gets a benefit from discarding, since Corvus is going to be discarding 2 cards from our hand in order to make use of his effect. So yeah, pretty good week if you want both of these cards. I think it's going to be one of the better ones in a while if your goal is to get a hold of Gladiator, who's definitely a card worth picking up. Moving on to our day 1 decks, we are starting off with Hela Glaive. So Hela is one of the stronger decks in the game right now. I do think there's a chance Corvus ends up finding his way into the Hela deck. Not sure if it's going to be worth it because Hela's already fairly consistent, but if nothing else, it's interesting to try. The benefits of Corvus in Hela is the fact that by getting that extra 1 energy, we're able to play a 6-drop on turn 5 into a 6-drop on turn 6. So that's pretty nice in those games where you end up not finding your Hela. Also, it is 1 card that fuels our Hela more, and if we don't have Hela in hand, it's almost risk-free discard on turn 3. This is a pretty big upgrade from Hellcow, where Hellcow you could only play as early as turn 4, so your odds of having drawn Hela and risking discarding it were increased. I think it is going to be a pretty significant difference having it on turn 3 instead of turn 4. Definitely a little riskier though, a little more RNG heavy, but for players who've played Hela for a long period of time, are probably used to that kind of RNG at this point. Now, I opted to take Black Knight out of this standard list. However, I do think you could go with a different direction if you want, and that would be Dracula. I think those are the 2 main picks where most of the other cards in Hela are core and stuff you probably don't want to be replacing. But if you want to find room for Corvus, I think Black Knight or Dracula are the cards to cut. Then next up, we just have a very traditional discard shell. Nothing groundbreaking here, we're just taking the 11 cards that pretty much every discard player has been playing for a long time, and we're throwing Corvus into the mix. We're also making use of Meek. If you don't have Meek, I think you could replace it with something like Nebula or even Nico or something. Just another good 1-drop, or maybe Storm if you don't have either of those cards available. But not too much to say about this one. Some people still manage to win games with this card. It's not the worst deck in the world, but I don't think Corvus on its own is enough to necessarily fix the problems it's had post-Chavez nerf. However, like previously mentioned, with Proxima Midnight coming up next week, maybe that will be enough, giving this deck another powerful thing to benefit from discarding, both from Corvus or MODOK or what have you. So maybe that'll be enough to propel this deck back into relevancy, but I'm not super sold on Corvus being enough in this list, at least right now, relative to the other decks that are strong, mainly because this deck doesn't really benefit a whole ton from the ramp. You're more so just running it for the 2 discard effects. And right now we only have 3 main targets for these discard effects, being Wolverine, Swarm, and Apocalypse. So maybe when Proxima joins the mix, that will make the fact that you're discarding 2 cards a bit more valuable. Another direction you could go with the classic discard style list is taking advantage of the newly buffed Helicarrier and the Collector, who gets pretty big off of discarding it. So basically this gives us another target where we get a big benefit from discarding this. It also gives us more cards to play, and they're things that your opponent can't reasonably play around because they're just random cards. Other than that, still using the core solid discard shell, but with Collector added as a 2-drop that can gain good power off discarding the Helicarrier, or really any of our cards that generate back to hand like Swarm and Apocalypse. Another interesting direction we could go is running even more fuel for our discard stuff, so this one opts to run both X-23 and Wolverine alongside Swarm and Apocalypse, so a whole ton of stuff to get benefit off of this Corvus discard. We're also running Cull Obsidian for stats. We have a handful of 1-drops, so we should be able to reliably play Cull Obsidian, and he gives us a pretty solid threat to get down with our excess energy that Corvus is providing us. And again, this is another deck that I think will also heavily benefit from the addition of Proxima Midnight when she joins the game next week, as by that point we will have a really high critical mass of cards that benefit from being discarded. We already have 4 of them in this deck, which is a lot, but I think by adding that 5th one, which is also a much larger amount of power than a lot of the other discard for free stats cards like Wolverine and X-23, I think that might be enough to get the ball rolling on this being a very powerful effect worth utilizing. Another way to make use of Corvus and Helicarrier together is going to be in Loki. Deck very much appreciates generating cards, can get even more value out of the Helicarrier due to the fact that we can throw those cards away with Loki, we can play them for cheaper with Quinjet, and naturally the Collector is going to benefit from us generating cards either through the Helicarrier or some of our other card generation like Snowguard and Agent Coulson. It's also very solid because by generating cards with Snowguard, Coulson, Mirage, even discarding our Swarm, it gives us more things in hand, so discarding with Corvus isn't as much of a downside, and since Loki is very effective at keeping a large hand size, we are more likely to be able to actually get use out of the extra energy that Corvus is providing. And then we have another experimental build here. This is kind of a ramp meets Hela style of deck. I think Hela is probably going to be better and more consistent overall, but Corvus seemed like a natural inclusion to a ramp style deck. And we can get quite a bit of benefit off of just including Hela to bring back some of those big things we might discard. I opted to go for the Sunspot She-Hulk Infinite package, as with ramping with Corvus, we can skip our turn 5, float 6 energy, and that allows us to play She-Hulk and Infinite together on the final turn if we have them in hand. We have Elektra as our backup tool of ramp. This could also be wave. It's going to depend on personal preference. Obviously with Infinite She-Hulk stuff, Elektra is a bit of a downside there, so if you're not really a fan of that risk, you could always run wave in that spot as well, and I think it'll do just fine. We have Arrow and Vision as our main things to be playing out on turn 5 after ramping with Corvus or Electro. Sunspot benefit from the bonus energy. Blade gives us another way to discard something alongside Corvus so we can actually get value out of Hela. And the other big things we have here are Doom, Odin to re-trigger him or our Arrow, and Magneto. And last but not least, we have a little bit of a tempo discard hybrid kind of list. It's definitely going to take some experimenting to find out the best way to do this, but I do think one interesting idea with Corvus Glaive is going to be just ramping out in a tempo style deck. And the first thing that came to mind to me was being able to ramp out Black Bolt. Being able to play Black Bolt on turn 4 seems really good. This also enables you to have 7 energy on the final turn of the game, which can allow you to play a big threat like Doom or Apocalypse alongside a 1-cost stature. We have Silver Samurai and Black Bolt to discard cards from the opponent's hand and enable our stature. Also has synergy with Dakin, so we can discard Dakin. Dakin can give us another thing in hand, which we can discard to Corvus. Same kind of reasoning for Swarm here, just kind of helps keep our hand big. Wolverine for an additional payoff. Blade, so we have another way to discard a card we want to get out of our hand, like our Apocalypse to grow it, or just being able to play it alongside Dakin, so we discard the shard immediately and pump him up to a 3/8, or just get more swarms in the hand, so that way when we go to play Corvus or Samurai, we can continue getting even more value off of our discard effects. And then Snowguard and Mirage, we're trying these out as ways to add more cards in the hand early on in the game, so that way when we are discarding with Corvus, if we don't have our payoffs for discarding, we won't go down too badly in hand size. And that's going to wrap it up for our day 1 decks for Corvus Glaive. I'd be curious to know what you think of this card. Are you picking it up? Are you opening spotlights this week? Are you going for Gladiator? I'd love to hear it, but as always, the decks will be linked in the description below if you want to import any of them into the game. And that's going to wrap it up for this video. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.